Okay, cheers for that. We are connected.
So it's
Yeah.
green. So we're going, first question, we're going, which one? First question. Yeah, no, first question.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Winsford Academy for our Climate and Nature Hustings. I'd like to thank Cheshire Wildlife Trust for sponsoring this event. Thank you very much to all our candidates for the new Mid-Cheshire constituency for participating. I'm Catherine Fallon and I'm representing Winsford Sustainability Partners. And this event is in conjunction with Sustainable Northwich. So from left to right, we have Charles Fifield for Conservatives. We have Jack Price-Harback for Liberal Democrats. We have Amanda Iremonger, who's standing in for our Green candidate. Amanda is the Green candidate from Macclesfield, and our candidate, Mark Green, was unable to come this evening. So thank you to Amanda for stepping in and doing another hustings. Then we've got our chair, Mark Sullivan. Mark is a trained chemist and spent most of his working life in industry on environmental projects. Mark is also an active member of Sustainable Northwich. Thank you to Mark for keeping the evening flowing. Next to him, we've got Andrew Cooper, the Labour candidate, and at the end, we've got Stella Mellor for Independence. We had hoped to have Helen Clawson, the other independent candidate, but sadly she emailed me about half an hour ago to say she was unfortunately at Leighton Hospital with her 2-year-old daughter who isn't well. So I've sent her our best wishes for that. And I have asked her if she said she prepared all the questions, so she was disappointed. So I have said maybe she could send me her answers and I'll put them on our website, which is winsfordsustainability@wordpress.com. You can pick up one of our flyers from the welcome desk if you don't know the websites, and it's got it on there. And you're welcome to look at, hopefully the answers from her will be on there. We also did invite the Reform candidate, Emma Guy, but unfortunately she wasn't able to attend. So the format for the evening is that each candidate will make a 2-minute opening statement before we move on to questions. For each question, they'll have 90 seconds allowed for an answer. A yellow card will be held up when 15 seconds remain to give you a warning, and then a red card at 90 seconds, at which point you need to wrap up immediately, please. And candidates, please respect the timer. Oh, what's happened now? Great.
Somebody put 5p in the meter.
Could you turn yours off? That makes good. Hello? Oh, great. Where was I? Yeah, in the interest of fairness. And at the end of the questions, Mark will invite each candidate to make a 1-minute closing statement. A bit of housekeeping, please turn off your mobile phones. And in the event of an emergency alarm sounding, please evacuate calmly through the fire exit, which is over there through those double doors. If those doors are blocked due to a fire or something, then there is an alternative emergency exit through those doors over there into a corridor which you follow round, and apparently you can get out that way. The caretaker is here, so I'm sure he would help in that unlikely situation. Finally, the event is being live streamed and recorded. If you want to access the recording later, or you know somebody who's missed it or perhaps is hard of hearing, again, the details are on our website. There's also CCTV in this room. We're not expecting any trouble, but Cheshire Police have been informed of the event. And just to point out that abusive or disrespectful behaviour is not going to be tolerated, and the police will be informed if this occurs. Please be courteous to each other in the audience and to our candidates. People putting themselves forward to be our elected representative deserve our full respect. Okay, so now over to Mark to get the proceedings started. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Well, I think the first thing is we're all going to have to speak up until we can get the microphone sorted. So I don't know if somebody could go and find the caretaker. Can everybody hear? That's the first thing. Yeah, you can hear the back, can you? Okay, well, that's great. So the acoustics are okay. Thank you, Winsford. Thank you, Northwich, Middlewich, if there's people in from Middlewich as well, for coming out on a Sunday night. It's yeah, a lovely evening, and yeah, it's great that you've come out here to listen to tonight's debate. And as Kathy said, we're going to start off with 2 minutes introductions from each candidate, starting with Charles for the Conservatives.
Thank you. I'm Charles Fifield, and I'm the Conservative candidate for Mid Cheshire. I've lived and worked around Northwich my entire life. I'm a chartered surveyor by profession, and I was a Cheshire West councillor. I'm married and I have 3 children. I've got muscular dystrophy, and I've been going to the excellent neuromuscular centre here in Winsford for over 20 years. And I want to be a strong voice for Mid Cheshire. Tonight, our focus is on climate change, and we need to continue the progress achieved so far, as the UK has already reduced emissions by the fastest rate across the G20 since 2010, as we drive towards net zero. Britain is now the first country in the G20 to halve its carbon emissions, and renewables now fuel almost 40% of electricity generation, up from only 7% in 2010. We boast the world's 5 largest offshore wind farms as we continue to lead the world in tackling climate change. I've worked in business for 30 years. I was a councillor for 12 years. I spent the last year working part-time for a housing charity. Through this, I've learned to work effectively with a wide range of businesses, charities, community groups, and people, often across political divides, to get things done. You need an MP who can represent you in Westminster and work with residents, businesses, and our local councils to ensure we get our fair share. I want to build a secure future for Mid Cheshire, but I need your help to do it by voting for me, Charles Fifield, on Thursday, the 4th of July. Thank you.
Right, speak up. Right, I'm Jack Price Harbatch. I'm 35, I'm married, I have 2 young kids, and I live in Northwich. So, cards on the table, I'm a truck driver. So, in my day job, I use hundreds of litres of diesel every single day, but I don't have the luxury to be able to choose a greener profession, because I believe our economy is geared more towards convenience rather than ethical choices. And I don't want to contribute to the destruction of our planet. I really don't, but that's the reality. Only the more well-off in society afford to make greener choices, whether that's leasing a Tesla, eating more fresh produce, or taking the train rather than the car. We now live in a society where working class people who don't have the agency of choice are the targets of protest by the likes of Just Stop Oil, which I'm sure quite a lot of you do support. But the reality is, it's down to the government of the day to change companies' behaviour, to impose proper windfall taxes, and to support low-income households to go green. And to do that, we need green-minded MPs, Liberal Democrats, particularly under Ed Davies' leadership. We are environmentalists to the core. And I hope this evening I can demonstrate to you that the Liberal Democrats' fair deal isn't just economically viable, but environmentally viable as well. Labour have rolled back on their initial green pledges due to fiscal rules. The Tories reward further oil and gas production thanks to a Prime Minister and his family who have vested interest in their profits. Reform believe that net zero is a harmful ideology, which is harmful in itself. And the Greens, well, we do share a lot of environmental policy, but when I look at their socialist levels of taxation and their lack of credibility regarding foreign affairs, that prevents some of the electorate, in my mind, from taking them seriously. I'm Jack Price Harbatch, and we, the Liberal Democrats, have a green fair deal. Thank you.
We're just going to check the microphone before carrying on. Hello, hello. Hello?
Hey.
Hello, yeah, so off and on again.
Do you have anybody in from IT support? Always works, doesn't it?
Hello. Yes, it works. Thank you for arranging these climate hustings today. I'm Amanda Ironmonger and I'm here representing the Green Party. Thank you for allowing me to join you on behalf of your candidate, Mark Green. The advertising for this event quoted that 71% of adults in the UK say not enough is being done to protect the environment for future generations. And I picked up this at Chester Zoo at the climate hustings on Monday, which says that 83% of people in the UK think the government should do more to tackle climate change. Probably here, even more of you would agree. Hold up your hand if you think that the next government should do more to help the climate. Well, that's all right then. Clearly you're all going to vote green and we can go home. But there's a problem with these questions.
Well, good while it lasted. If you're asked, would you like more good things in your life? Well, I'd certainly say yes. But the problem comes when the question is clarified with the reality. More good things cost more. More money, more time, or something else. And the same is true with doing more to tackle the climate. It's not free. In the Green Party manifesto, we have clear plans to tackle the climate emergency at home and abroad, and we explain how these plans will be funded. Many of the other candidates here today are good, worthy local folk. Indeed, a couple of them have already given their time as councillors on your local council. But it doesn't matter who they are, they will still be hampered by their party's manifesto and policies. I'm looking forward to hearing what others have to say today. But I hope by the end of this, I will have convinced you to vote Green. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for coming tonight, listening to us all, and especially thank you to those of you for whom this is your third hustings, and you've already heard me say this twice. General elections are a unique opportunity to choose not just who represents you, but what kind of future we want for our country. I'm Andrew Cooper, and it's an honour to be standing as your Labour candidate for a seat that I've lived and worked in for most of my adult life, and where my children were born and go to school. In mid-Cheshire, 1 in 4 children are living in poverty. At Leighton Hospital last year, less than half of visitors to A&E were seen within 4 hours. And since Liz Truss's mini-budget, mortgages have gone up by hundreds of pounds each month. Things can be so much better than this. Breaking down barriers to opportunity has defined my work as a councillor, and it will define what I hope to achieve as your MP. I've chosen to dedicate my life to serving our community because I believe that every child should have the opportunity to reach their full potential, that we should fight the pernicious idea that your background or your circumstances, who you know or where you come from, should shape your life more than your talent or your creativity or your determination. Our manifesto, which was launched last week, and I'm very proud of it. We will deliver economic stability so we can grow our economy. We'll cut NHS waiting times by delivering 40,000 more appointments each week. We'll create Great British Energy to secure clean and lower cost power. We'll tackle antisocial behaviour by investing in more police officers and reforming youth services. And we'll give our children the best possible education by recruiting 6,500 new teachers. This is our ambitious programme to get back to economic growth and deliver hope and opportunity and give our 3 great salt towns and our country the change it needs.
Hi, so I'm Stella Miller. I've lived in Winsford my whole life. My dad grew up in Northwich. I haven't got anything down because I'm very nervous.
but I like to speak from the heart. If anyone's seen anything I write on Facebook, my spelling's terrible because I write from the heart. So for me, the environment has been a massive part of my life since I was a teenager. Before the internet, before anything, it has always mattered to me. I've got 2 children. They're in their, one's in their 30s, one's in the audience. I've got a grandson of 10. And when we hit the 1.5 degrees, it terrified me. I was thinking, my grandson's going to be 14. It's scary. My leaflets are done on recyclable, renew, and they are also going to be recycled. For me, the environment is in a horrendous state, and it's something that we can all do. I'm not in a party, so for Mid Cheshire, I will be standing for Mid Cheshire, making a difference in our towns that we got levelling up money for that completely got dismissed. It all went to elsewhere for the Cheshire West and Chester councillors could have brought it into Winsford, Northwich and Middlewich and decided not to. The environment, there's so much more we can do. I have many disabilities. I use a lot of medication. I thought putting it in the recycling bin was stopping it going to landfill. It doesn't, if you take it to different chemists, that's where it needs to go. I think it should be people before profit. And sorry, it's such a passionate, the environment is so more, it means so much to me, sorry. It really matters to me about our environment. The fact that we're destroying it, the energy companies are overcharging people. We haven't got enough, when we do the wind and the solar, there isn't enough places to put it. So we're getting charged twice for it. We need more places for it to go so we can use more renewable energy. And we need more education on recycling. People need to know that, as I say myself, I thought, right, I have plastic, my medication goes in plastic, and I thought that recycling it gets redone, and it doesn't. What else we get through as well as mindfulness. Sorry, this is my first stint as well. And I can only speak from the heart and for the experiences that I've got, and speaking to lots of people in all areas, in all different
Okay, right. Thanks, Dolly. Yes, I'm sure we'll come on to some of those topics as we go through the evening, because we've got a really wide and diverse range of questions. And I thank everybody who submitted a question. The questions have been provided to the candidates in advance, so they do have had a little bit of time to think about their answers. So once Anthony finds his seat, we'll get on to the first question.
Yeah, unfortunately, the microphone isn't working, so our first question is from Mark.
And thank you to the organisers for putting this event on, by the way. Candidates, what changes, economic, political, physical, do you see happening in this constituency and in the UK over the next 10 years because of climate change?
Okay, so Charles, we start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think we'll continue to see more disruptive weather and flooding. So we'll all need to continue to adapt for that. I think we're going to need to be innovative in terms of what's described as the green economy. But I think we're going to have to be able to strike the right balance, because simply reaching net zero in the UK without other countries, especially China and India, doing similar, it ain't going to change, because otherwise all we're going to do is destroy our own economy and outsource production overseas to countries with lower environmental standards. And that kind of defeats the whole point of this. As such, I think we're going to need some sort of political consensus on this. And whilst I have the greatest amount of respect, for example, the Green Party in relation to their proposals, they're simply unrealistic, and that they're in danger of making the perfect the enemy of the good. We have to get the right balance in relation to how we achieve this. And that is going to be the difficult decision. And that's where part of the decision you've got to make as who you want to be your MP comes in there. You're going to need somebody who's able to cross political divides, and who's going to be able to work out and work with other people to get the right balance. And that's the sort of change that I think we're going to need over the next 10 years to deal with the changes that are coming from climate change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, firstly, economically, I think we're going to see more volatility in our energy prices unless we actually seriously reduce our dependency on oil and gas, and we speed up the transition to green energy sources, such as things like offshore wind, nuclear energy, biofuels. We saw that the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, countries like Germany, for example, which were heavily dependent on Russian gas, they were hit harder than most because of that dependency on those natural resources. I think politically, we're going to see a lot more anti-net zero lobbying from your right-wing media. I mean, they've been at it already, but we're going to see an increase of that. The Conservatives, Reform, they're probably going to go for that angle as well. Now, ideally, perfect scenario for us as a Liberal Democrat, if we were to become the official opposition, that is a big stretch, I accept. We could probably put more pressure on Labour to achieve those green aims that they originally set out. We also need to move to proportional representation as well, so that more green-minded parties like us, like the Greens, get more of a say. Now, conversely, that means Reform will probably get some more MPs, but at least overall, in the grand scheme of things, green voices are going to be heard. And when I look at the physical changes, I think we're just going to see more extremes in our weather. We've seen heat waves in Canada, flash floods in Germany, more wildfires in Greece, Australia, snow in Florida. Countries on the equator, they're going to be less habitable, and we're going to see further migration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. At the climate hustings on Monday, all the experts were united in saying that the urgency of addressing the climate emergency needed to be better communicated. This is the defining issue of our time. The UN's Intergovernmental Change Panel warned in 2021 that the global threat level posed by climate change was code red for humanity. Yet since then, we've seen the will to do anything is stumbling. As a result, it's unlikely that we can keep global warming to 1.5 degrees. Indeed, it's pretty unlikely we're going to keep it to 2 degrees with the sort of responses I'm hearing from my colleagues at this table. By 2040, we need to be 90% net zero, even to limit the increase to this range. And this is just not going to happen from what I'm hearing. To do this, scientific communities are saying clearly we need to shift to a post-growth economy, but governments haven't accepted this yet. We need an environmental strategy with economic policy combined to address the climate emergency, and without this, we're going to be in deep trouble. We need help from sociologists, climatologists, biologists to advise governments how to deal with the crisis. But governments also need to listen and take the population with them. I hope I'm preaching to the converted in this audience, but isn't it frustrating that this isn't being shouted from the rooftops today? Unfortunately, without action, it certainly will be in 10 years' time. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I agree. The climate and nature crisis is the greatest long-term challenge, long-term global challenge that we face. I think the science is very clear on this, and there's no debating it. But we don't need science to see how our climate has changed. We've had more extreme weather, more flooding, notably locally. We went over 40 degrees Celsius in Britain, didn't we, only a couple of years ago. And the last 8 years have been the hottest on record. But how we respond to it and how we communicate it, this is important, and it's going to define our future. Now, what we think our first most important change that we would like to make is we want to see a clean energy transition. We think that there's a huge opportunity to generate growth, tackle the cost of living crisis, and make us energy independent. And that's why we want to see clean energy by 2030. Indeed, it's our second mission. We think we need to fix public transport. With buses, for example, every day millions of journeys are made by bus, but they've been in a state of managed decline, haven't they, over the last 30 years? So we want local communities to be able to take back control of their bus services and have a greater say on routes and fares. Similarly with rail, we think that rail should be unified under a single Great British Railways, make it reliable, affordable, high quality and more efficient. On river pollution, we think we need to tackle river pollution. It's just shocking that children can get ill playing in rivers nowadays, isn't it? We want to put water companies under special measures. We want the regulator to have powers to block bonus payments. And these are just some of the measures that we think are essential if we're going to play our part as a country in meeting this global challenge.
So I believe that sorry. One of the things that's happening with the electric and gas companies is they are going on estimated bills, which is what is causing the massive price range. And they're allowed to do nothing. We're not using that much gas and electricity. We are. They're also overcharging people. And this is where one of the price caps, and this is not getting communicated properly. And this is one of the things that I've been fighting for the residents of Winsford already. That's one of the things that's going on with people who can't read the meters themselves, and this is what's not going back to the government, where with the also what needs to, we've been going to Stonehenge for 22 years, and we can all we've seen the I'm not this one, but by great we've seen Stonehenge. We've seen Stonehenge degrade in the last 22 years through weather and the pollution of the site. We've noticed that when we went the other day. We also need to have better. We need to make sure that more stuff is done on the environment. That people are more aware of. Yeah.
So we move on to the
We'll keep going.
we'll move on to the second question.
Okay, right. So the second question is from Mike.
Okay, so Jack, answers this first.
Climate crisis is a health crisis. 3,000 people died from heat-related illnesses like heart failure, stroke, and chronic kidney disease during the unprecedented 40-degree heat wave of July 22. This situation is set to worsen. Our hospitals flood, IT systems go down in the heat. I wouldn't worry how the NHS will cope. Will the candidates commit to supporting the Climate and Nature Bill, which details what the government needs to do to reduce emissions, address climate change, and protect and restore nature?
Well, in terms of heat stroke, I've had it. It ain't fun. And being a ginger person, I am more susceptible to it than most, so I have to be really, really careful. So you're absolutely right about the prevalence of heat-related illnesses. And when it comes to the Climate and Nature Bill, as candidates, we get asked to sign all sorts, you know, will you save the crustaceans? Will you sign the CAP manifesto, for example? But one of the best campaign groups has been 0 Hour. They've been really at the forefront of the Climate and Nature Bill, and they've been really supportive in helping us advance those. And from what I understand, I believe myself and Mark are the only candidates that have actually signed that pledge. We want to achieve the ultimate goal of net zero by 2045. But legally, the bill says we want to achieve it by 2050. We want to establish an authority dedicated to this so that we can help local councils do this, create industrial strategies around a greener economy, get more apprenticeships to manufacture heat pumps, enforce building regulations, retrofitting of existing buildings. We need to support people on low incomes to help do that. We also want 90% of electricity to be produced by renewables by 2030. And we want farming that's sustainable so we can incentivize farmers to go greener by using less harmful pesticides, for example.
Thank you for the question. I particularly like the way you talk about the interdependency between health and nature. And so much of what the Green Party stands for is that interdependency between all the different variables that we need to make the economy greener and the country greener. The Climate and Nature Bill was introduced by the Green Party's Caroline Lucas in 2020. The need to cut emissions, to make sure we reverse the destruction of nature by 2030, and to involve citizens in deciding the fairest way forwards. Something that nobody could disagree with, I would think. The NHS is in crisis, even without the changes we're seeing to the climate. We in the Green Party have honestly and transparently detailed what it will take to reverse that decline, so that we're not seeing patients waiting far too long and deteriorating as they do so, so that we can research cures and preventative ways of keeping people healthy in their lives, and so that we can address the mental health crisis we're going to talk about in a bit. And to do this, we must keep the NHS in public hands. The Greens have committed to this, costed it, and explained where the funding will come from. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the climate crisis has accelerated the nature crisis, hasn't it? And whilst we enjoy remarkable natural beauty in Britain, in recent years, we've become one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. Now, the Climate and Nature Bill, it's been presented as a private member's bill, I think at least 3 times now, hasn't it? Most recently by Alex Sobel. It's fallen each time, but I would have supported Alex's bill had I been in Parliament at the time. Our manifesto includes our own plan for climate and nature. We want to increase access to nature with 3 new forests, 9 new national river walks and wild national parks. We want to plant millions of trees. We want a ban on bee killing, pesticides. We want to improve flood resilience. We want to grow nature-rich habitats such as wetlands and peat bogs. But really importantly, we want to see the 30 by 30 part of the Environment Act implemented. Now, the Wildlife and Countryside Link have did a review into our progress implementing that just at the end of last year. And we've made little progress on the fundamental stages of it, strengthening the legal framework, designating new sites for legal protection, and improving the condition of existing protected sites. And we're committed to moving that forward. I think that's really important. But most importantly, we need to work in partnership with civil society, with community groups, with business to restore and protect our natural world.
Just to be clear, are you supporting the Climate and Nature Bill, or are you supporting Labour's version of the Climate and Nature Bill?
At the moment, I'm supporting Labour's version of the Climate and Nature Bill because there isn't a Climate and Nature Bill to support. If it comes forward, I'd see what was in it at the time.
Okay, thank you for clearing that.
Charles?
Thank you. No, I'm not supporting that bill. We've already committed to net zero by 2050. We've already taken action. Again, I have to point out that destroying our own economy on the altar of climate change will achieve nothing if other countries do not act too. We are setting a global example already, and others must follow suit. Because if not, we are simply cutting our nose off to spite our face. We need a strong economy to pay for a strong NHS. Those are the decisions that we have to make. We have to make balanced decisions in relation to this. Jack, in the previous answer, made reference to the issues that Germany have had, where they were getting their gas supply from Russia. Germany are in the situation of where they are using coal-fired power stations because the Green Party forced them to close all their nuclear power stations. This is crazy. If we want to solve this problem, there is only one way that we can do it, and that is to get nuclear power. That is the only way to buy time, to get the sufficient energy that we need to save the planet. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Next question.
Okay, thank you. So just turning off my mobile phone. The third question is from Linda.
Our children's mental health is vital. Would you support the introduction of yoga lessons to become part of the PE sessions at all ages to help promote good posture, and introduce mindfulness sessions to help ease feelings of anxiety and being overwhelmed to all school-age children. We all know time spent in a nature setting is vital for our well-being. Maybe these sessions could be combined to learn the benefits of our natural world too. If children learn early that our wildlife and wild spaces are essential and must be protected, they will grow up knowing how to live in harmony with it.
Yeah, thank you. That's a wonderful question. And you are right. Children's health, mental health is vital and it's declining. And it's deteriorating not only in our children, but across the population. And it has been doing for quite a while. The Green Party is planning, on your question around schools and supporting schools, the Green Party is planning to ensure that all schools have counsellors. But the overall thrust of our entire manifesto is geared to improving for mental health for everyone. And I'm just going to talk about 2 or 3 of our policies. Firstly, mental health and poverty. Taking children out of poverty by removing the 2-child benefit cap and other measures will make a difference. Improving housing and reducing the fear of eviction. Addressing the crisis in the NHS where mental health support is totally inadequate. And improving access to nature, you mentioned that in your question. And in driving the shift to a 4-day week. I could go on about this issue because it's really important to me, but I will run out of time. The Bible talks about the sins of the father to the 7th generation. And what I hear from this is that parents and their mental health have a huge impact on the mental health of their children and their children's children and of the society around them. At the moment, we face an explosion of mental health issues, and the solution is not more of the same. Thank you.
Yeah, alongside poverty, mental health is an enormous barrier to learning, and we've seen post-pandemic an explosion in difficulty with child and adolescent mental health, along with backlogs in the system. The struggle to access support is paralysing children and young people through their formative years. Now, on your specific questions about yoga in schools and mindfulness and access to nature, I have to say that my children already do all 3 of those things. So perhaps I can recommend Northwich Primary School to you for those 3. I would say on mindfulness, you do need a bit of care with that because it isn't suitable for neurodiverse children necessarily, children with ADHD in particular. Well, I'm telling you as a child with ADHD, it doesn't work for all children, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have benefits for some, and it'd be great to see it. I'm a governor at a primary school in Northwich, and I can tell you that the curriculum's already overcrowded, and you can't ask schools to do more without taking something off. I think what we would like to see is a greater emphasis on art and music in the curriculum. And I think that art and music are, if mindfulness is about being in the moment, I think that they form part of that as well. In general, we want to see access to specialist mental health professionals in every school and get early access, early support for problems before they escalate further.
Whilst I agree that children's mental health is vital, and I certainly agree that green spaces and nature and natural settings are good for children, like Andrew, I don't believe enforced yoga and mindfulness on the school curriculum are necessarily the answer. I think competitive sport is good for children. It teaches them team building and also how to deal with disappointment, which is part of life. And I think part of the problem that we have is social media here, is it creates an artificial expectation with how life is. And I think that causes a lot of anxiety and depression and mental health issues. And on that basis, I do think that our proposed ban on mobile phones in schools for children in our manifesto will do far more good than for a far wider spectrum of children. I do think children need to learn more about our natural environment, and I'd certainly recommend working with the farming community, things like farm open days, perhaps working with the NFU to help widen awareness so that there is greater exposure of green spaces, because more and more people live in urban areas and fewer have direct access, straight access to green spaces. I'm also pleased there's a manifesto commitment in my party's manifesto to continue to support programmes that encourage disadvantaged children and young people to access green spaces. Thank you.
Well, as it just so happens, Linda, I think I responded to your email yesterday, but since then my answer's kind of changed. When it comes to yoga, I've tried it. I'm not very nimble. I used to, I mean, you can tell, I used to play rugby league, used to play American football, so I've got some lingering injuries, and me and yoga do not get on. But my mum loves it, my eldest son, he loves it. And I must admit, I didn't expect to answer so frankly about mental health, but I think it's important. I have depression. I've had it on and off for about 14 years. I've had periods in my life where I've been on medication. I still am. I've had mental health crises of my own. Like last year, I was in a really bad way and I had to have counselling to basically sort that out. But through counselling, my counsellor came to the conclusion within the first half an hour of speaking to her that it's very likely I've got ADHD. Now, if I had £2 spare, I could pay to get that official diagnosis tomorrow, but I can't. So I'm on a waiting list just like everybody else. And if I were to get that official diagnosis, it would confirm a lot for me personally. It would explain a lot. But in terms of what we can do for our kids, like the Greens, like Labour, we support having a mental health professional in every school. In terms of mindfulness, I'm absolutely supportive of using outdoor spaces. I mean, luckily my kids go to a nursery where they're surrounded by it, but I think the problem with mid-Cheshire is because it's so urban, kids don't easily have access to that space. Thank you.
You okay to carry on? Should we move on to the next question?
Can she answer question 3?
You want, okay.
Yeah. So I believe in mindfulness because I've trained in mindfulness and anything that can help children's mental health and well-being.
You can leave it if you want and join in with the next question. Thank you, that's fine. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question, and the next question is from Janet.
Air pollution from the burning of fossil fuels, such as those used for transport, exceeds OO levels in nearly all urban areas in the UK and is linked to multiple health risks. What action can you take to improve public transport in our area and cycling infrastructures?
Thank you. Look, you make a really great point. We have an air quality management area in this constituency in Middlewich along Lewin Street, Ledsmithy Street, that area, which is one of the rationales for building the Middlewich bypass. And I'm sure everybody here will be, if whoever's elected, will look forward to having that meeting with the roads minister on day one to try and get that sorted. There's poor air quality in Rudheath as well, in particular by Rudheath Primary School. Look, I've tried to reduce my personal impact by cycling to school with my kids in the cargo bike. And as a Northwich councillor, I've pushed forward this cycling infrastructure vision via the Northwich Neighbourhood Plan and via Cheshire West and Chester with my Fellowship of the Ring vision to link the 3 towns via the waterways network. And next Labour government is going to revolutionise buses, I hope. Every day, millions of people catch buses to work, for school, shopping, to go to appointments, but it's often an overlooked mode of transport, and it's been in managed decline for a long time. And we know locally bus routes have been cut to the bone, haven't they? We're the only country in the developed world that gives private companies the right to pick and choose routes and fares without any say from local communities. And we think that every community deserves to have the same powers as the likes of London, to have a proper say over their bus network. And that's why we plan to allow areas to take back control of their bus services and turn the tide on decades of decline. On rail, have I run out of time? We're going to do good things for rail. There you go.
So we try to increase as a town council more bike riding lanes, and also to make sure that it was safe for cycling. Also, there's people who use mobility scooters, and to make that as well more accessible, because the roads in Winsford and Patton, Northwich and Winsford, we need to also take that into consideration. We need to also, again, like Andrew said, make the buses back into their community, because it's only the communities that know how badly, and talking to people how badly that the buses being late, the buses completely not in, and also the train as well. They're not accessible to most people, the spaces in between the platforms. So we need to make sure that they're back into some sort of public ownership, so that we can make sure that to make it fair that everyone can get to places and nobody's left out.
Thank you. I mean, as part of the 6 pledges that I've got for the local area, I'm looking to reopen the train line between Northwich and Middlewich as part of improving public transport. Like Andrew, very much keen on day one trying to go and get the long-awaited Middlewich Eastern bypass started, because that will improve air quality, especially for Middlewich. I'm also keen to promote the greater use of pedestrian crossings in the area. I mean, this is something that I tried to promote whilst I was a councillor. However, Cheshire West Council has been exceptionally slow on actioning this, which is a real shame, because I believe pedestrian crossings are actually a better use of resources than 20-mile-an-hour limits, which the police basically won't enforce except if they're outside schools. I think pedestrian crossings are good things because they can help slow down traffic. They encourage more people to walk. As sort of Stella mentioned, if you've got mobility like I have in relation to an electric wheelchair, trying to cross the road without a pedestrian crossing because you're so low down, you are literally taking your life in your hands when you do it. So I would certainly go and sort of say stuff in relation to that. And also I'm pleased that the £2 bus fare journeys is being extended in our manifesto for the whole of the Parliament, so i.e. up until 2029. Thank you.
Well, I was going to say, Andrew, with your Lord of the Rings strategy, if you called it "Thou shalt bus pass," I'm here all week. But last year, when I stood as a candidate in the ward of David and Morton and Kingsmead, I was pretty envious of the fact that Kingsmead, in particular, has got an excellent cycle infrastructure, and I'd like to see that throughout the whole of the constituency. I mean, Cycle Route 5 goes past my house, so I definitely benefit from that. And I personally, I love cycling, especially on the trails. Whitegate Way, Delamere Forest, absolutely love to cycle myself personally. But one of the things I campaigned for was to have a dedicated cycle path alongside the A530 between the Morrison's factory and the Junction 18 Business Park in Middlewich, because, excuse me, not many people choose to cycle down that road. And as someone who likes to cycle and someone who drives trucks, I can see it from both sides. It's dangerous. We need proper cycling infrastructure so that people can make those green choices. It's terrible for me because I work in Stoke, so I have to drive to work and back every day, and I hate doing it, but that's the choice we have to make. I'd love to see what we get in cities, you know, proper electric bike schemes. That'd be great. But when it comes to things like change, for example, it's a fundamentally broken model that needs completely revisited if we're going to change things in this country.
Yes, goodness, we do need to address air pollution. Nationally, for Charles, it costs the UK economy 20 billion a year, and for the rest of us, it's associated with 40,000 deaths. The Green Party is pushing for a Clean Air Act, which will set new air quality standards for the UK and enshrine the right to breathe clean air. Walking and cycling aren't just good for reducing carbon emissions, they're also good for our own personal health. They make us all happier and healthier. Elected Greens will push to spend £2.5 billion on new cycleways and footpaths. So you might get your wish, Jack. And we want to adopt Active Travel England's objective for 50% of trips in England's towns and cities to be walked, wheeled or cycled by 2030. We'll also seek to improve air quality through charging for the 15% of people, 15% of people take 70% of flights, and we plan on charging them. Public transport is more complicated. In urban areas, the cost dynamic is clear. There are enough people using it to make frequent services viable, but many areas need more improvement. We need to bring rail services back into public ownership, deliver free bus travel for under 18s, give control of buses back to local authorities, and on this I'm in agreement with many of the others, and allocate funding. Only the Greens will prioritise climate issues to address the climate emergency and also improve health and well-being on such matters. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on, our fifth question is from Anthony.
The more money we have, the greater our capacity for environmental damage. And we call that standard of living. Great money comes with great responsibility. Do you feel that we should say enough? And instead of quality of life, go for caring, sharing, mending society, more in tune with the natural environment, and making it easy to live life well on less?
Yes, I agree. I think the companies that pollution people should have to pay for the damage that they do. And in the pandemic, it surprised me how many people for the first time were hearing birds and things like that, and they never heard before. And it also shows how much nature can takes back over. And I also think that if we share and we stop overindulging in things. Years ago, when we bought white goods, they'd last for a long time. Now, when they get broken, they get replaced. This is what's causing landfills and things, and that needs to stop. If something needs repair, is broken, it should be repaired and not replaced. And years ago, that's what used to happen, and now it's easier just to replace something. That needs to stop. And the companies that are doing that, and this is where we need to stand and make a change. And I don't understand why it's easier to replace something than it is to fix it. And yeah, I do think enough of that, and that's not just one area. That's not just in that's in many different areas as well. As I say, the pandemic, I think it learned a lot of us about how we can do with little, how much we don't need a lot of how we can cope with less than what we were maybe exceeding with using before. Sorry, I'm about way to.
Thank you. It's kind of coming along, is the money the root of all evil? And I'd have to go and say, you only need to look at what went on in the former Soviet Union and communist China to see that you do not need to live in a capitalist society to have huge environmental damage going on. My view is that we are a capitalist society and we use money to calculate transactions. This has brought considerable improvements in the standard of living over time. Quality of life is important, but far less definable. It's a bit like beauty in that it's in the eye of the beholder. What improves your quality of life may well not improve my quality of life. And it's about finding what is the right balance for us all. I mean, I do think that what Stella said about trying to be a society where we mend more things is a good idea. Just on the way over, my wife and I were chatting. We were talking about things where you've got like the clothing and the fabric industry, where how many of us repair our own clothes and stitch them back together. I suspect in this audience quite a good proportion, but for a lot of people they don't. gets thrown away, and we need to sort of think about that. And I think, yeah, that's kind of what we need to do. But I just think if we're not careful and get the right balance, how do we generate power? How will we continue advances in medical science? How will we work? And who will grow our food? Yeah.
Well, to touch on Charles's point about capitalism, as a liberal, I do support capitalism, but not the neoliberal type capitalism that we saw under Liz Truss, where we see things like the return of fracking, and we see really reckless financial decisions being made that are harmful to the environment. I believe in regulation as well as capitalism being allowed to thrive. I believe in a balance. So for a more equitable system, I think you have to tackle inequality at its roots. So things like poverty that we alluded to earlier, the 2-child benefit cap, it has to go. We have to ensure that all primary kids get a free school meal regardless of the parents' income, and at secondary school, making sure that those who are from low incomes get that free school meal. We want to support low-income families to go green. As I've said earlier, we need more access to fresh food by backing British farming. We need to give them the incentives to actually produce more fresh food. We need to replace the European agricultural policy with something that works. Unless you've got like a really diverse farm, the policy under the Conservative government didn't really support it. So if you're a one-man band with a few sheep, for example, you'd suffer. But if you could grow multiple different types of plants, fruits, you had different types of livestock, you could thrive. We want to also offer free personal social care for every elderly and disabled adult. So by doing these things, we give people the chance to enhance the quality of life by being able to spend more of their own money the way they want to. Thank you.
Sometimes I wonder whether the Green Party have planted some of these questions, because Mike, you are so right. Scientific communities are clearly saying we need to shift to a post-growth economy, but governments haven't accepted this yet. We need an environmental strategy and an economic policy combined to deal with the climate emergency. And without this, we'll be in deep trouble. Frankly, I can do no better than quote the Green Party manifesto on this. Despite the other political parties continuing to argue that endless economic growth is the solution to all our problems, there is a growing consensus that it is actively undermining our well-being. We can no longer continue to exploit oil, gas, forests and oceans for economic growth. Their overuse is already threatening our future survival, as well as the future of our economy and society. Green MPs will change the way success is measured in our economy with new indicators that take account of the well-being of people and planet, and that track our progress towards building a greener and fairer future.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Anthony, for the question. I think, look, it's a wonderful vision, isn't it, for a kinder and fairer society that I've got a lot of sympathy with. But to many people who are struggling, they want to know, they want to be sure that they can feed their families, that they can heat their homes, and that they can pay their rent or their mortgages. We've got 1 in 4 children living in poverty in this constituency. We've got to break down barriers to opportunity. We've got to break the cycle of deprivation. We need to invest in our public services and end this period of decline when nothing works as it should. And this means getting back to economic growth. It means restoring stability. It means allowing for better pay and better living standards and giving the government the space to fix public services. Now, this is not mutually exclusive with sharing more or caring more or encouraging reuse or taking care of our natural environment. In fact, I think that they go hand in hand. I think both are needed and both are about hope that we can offer our children a better future.
So the next question is from Pete.
Tim.
Oh, Tim, sorry. We have a stand-in. It's Tim. Thank you.
Question I would like definitely to ask myself as well. A bit more contentious, perhaps. Do you think that people and organisations that pollute our environment, brackets, rivers, beaches and things like that, are sufficiently held to account for their actions and pay enough of the cost towards putting things right? And if not, what would your party do, if elected, to ensure that polluters are held legally to account and required to meet the costs arising to pollution they cause? Also, will your government ensure that the Environment Agency has sufficient resources and the power to force polluters to clean up their act? Not to those up to Charles.
First one, this Charles.
Yep, thank you. We've increased the monitoring of storm overflows in England from 7% in 2010 to 100% today, and that's more than any other nation in the UK. We're cracking down on companies that pollute our rivers, including introducing penalties for environmental breaches and giving regulators more powers to fine water companies. We scrapped the cap on civil penalties and broadened their scope to target a much wider range of offences, from breaches of storm overflow permits to the disposal of hazardous waste. Our plan to crack down on water pollution has led to 59 successful prosecutions against water companies that pollute illegally, securing fines of over £150 million, which will be reinvested in our water. We're also banning bonuses for bosses of water companies that have committed criminal breaches, with a ban applying to all executive board members and chief executives. There will be new powers made possible through the Environment Act. We're requiring Ofwat to incentivise water companies to invest to reduce the use of storm overflows. Between 2020 and 2025, water companies will invest £7.1 billion for environmental improvements. Last year, 90% of our designated bathing waters were classified good or excellent, up from 76% in 2010, but we must go further, which is why we've got our ambitious plan for water. Thank you.
Well, when it comes to the sewage scandal, that's probably one of the core policies in our Fair Deal. In 2024, we have E. coli in our food supply, and we've got triathletes throwing up in 2024, and the government just don't seem to care. Now, one of our key policies is to replace Ofwat with a tougher regulator, an army of sewage busters to enforce that regulation. When we look at how water companies have been privatised since Margaret Thatcher brought it in back in 1989, they reckon that it's going to cost about £80 billion to actually restore our sewage network to something that's actually going to work, that's actually going to bring down this pollution. But that just so happens to be the amount of money that shareholders have actually taken in dividends. To me, they are dealing in cryptocurrency. That's what I call them. It's just... And what's worse is that just before Parliament was dissolved, Tim Farron, he actually put an amendment through to hold the bosses of these water companies criminally responsible for their actions. The Tories voted against it because that would be acknowledgement of the poor legislation they put in the first place. We, of course, voted for it. Labour, they abstained just because they knew the numbers wouldn't add up. What happened to voting on principle?
I'd really like to be standing here repeatedly saying, give us your money. Because unlike the other parties, we're not funded by polluters and fossil fuel companies. And frankly, we can't afford the campaigns we need to address the climate emergency. At least this independence does mean that we can have policies to combat pollution and environmental damage. So yes, we will levy a carbon tax, and we will close the loopholes in the windfall tax. Rosebank comes to mind. And yes, we will push to restore the fuel duty escalator. And yes, we will push forward the recommendations from the Climate Change Committee to reduce emissions of polluting fluorinated gases in all manufactured goods. And yes, we will stop the water companies polluting our rivers, lakes and seas by nationalising the water companies and by investing in DEFRA so they can adequately fund the Environment Agency and Natural England. So yes, the Green Party is the only one which will comprehensively and systematically from top to bottom end the drive towards increasingly polluting our green and pleasant land. Thank you.
Yeah, in general, we have strong environmental regulations in this country, but something has clearly gone very wrong in recent years, hasn't it? And the hollowing out of the Environment Agency with more reliance on self-reporting, more self-regulation, more marking your own homework, it isn't working, is it? And as Jack says, the stark example is the water industry. Only last month, Thames Water issued a don't drink notice. I mean, what's gone wrong there where you can't drink water out of the tap? We've had people getting ill by playing in rivers. We've had the was it the Olympic anyway, the rowing team that got ill after a tournament. We've had thousands of hours of discharge into the River Weaver, and £25 billion worth of bonuses have been paid to water executives since the last general election. Now, as I said at the beginning, Labour will put the water industry under special measures. We'd give the regulator new powers to block bonus payments immediately. We would bring in criminal charges for repeated law breaking. We'd end self-monitoring and have independent monitoring of every outlet. And we'd have severe and automatic fines for law breaking. Our plan would have meant that 2/3 of bonuses would have been blocked in the last year. And I think that's what we need to be doing.
So this obviously is a general election, and this is for Mid-Cheshire. So all the other candidates here have to follow their party's policies. I'm concerned about what's going on in Mid-Cheshire. So 7 weeks ago, on the turn near to Leighton Hospital, for 7 weeks now, there has been a leak from the sewages across the fields from the water end of the town on the water end as you go into Leighton to the top end of Winsford as you go into Leighton. This is still in Cheshire West and Chester. This has been reported. Over the last year, we've had 3 notifications of our waters being turned off. We've had blackouts. I would make sure, and I have reported this as well, that the companies that are polluting our waters locally, not just in London or wherever, because we in the north are always left. The south, where every other place gets treated much better than we do in the north. It's time that us in the north get treated fairly. For me, Mid-Cheshire is okay. We have to go to Westminster, but it's us in Mid-Cheshire that needs to be taken seriously and needs someone with a strong voice who will stand up for us, who do not get treated fairly. We need to hold the companies to account in this area and not up in London, and who get away with it.
Okay, thank you. Question 7 is from Alison.
Thank you very much. Just the start of this gathering, we had a lovely chat with some people who come from Middlewich, and he's actually head of the transition in Northwich, centre in Northwich. I just hope this is the start of many gatherings of local people coming together, raising awareness, sharing what we know about local areas, and then we relate to our future candidates who serve us very well in the past. Hopefully we will build those links. I'd like to talk about HyNet, which is a huge concern to all of us and a huge area of investment. But hydrogen is a total red herring. There will be a place for green hydrogen as a storage medium for excess renewable energy generated, but hydrogen from fossil fuels is just a stop to the fossil fuel companies to enable them to continue to destroy the environment. Hydrogen can never replace methane for transport or heating. The failures of 2 hydrogen villages and Toyota being forced to go electric, despite its declaration that it would go all out for hydrogen, are graphic proof of this. I just wondered if the candidates would like to give us their opinion of the HyNet proposal, how much they are going to toe the line of Cheshire West, and how much they would stand up for the proper introduction of green hydrogen, and what they think of carbon capture and the storage of that, and if any of them plan to encourage reduction of methane from waste biomatter for use until natural gas can be dispensed.
Now, I'm going to be totally honest, science is not my strong point, so I've had to do some really last-minute cramming on this one. I'll be totally frank. And when it comes to hydrogen, I've always gone back to what James May said on an episode of Top Gear years ago. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, but it's extremely difficult to isolate. And that's why it's not feasible. We're only seeing literally in a handful of places around the world where hydrogen is actually a fuel source for vehicles. So it clearly doesn't work. when it comes to carbon capture, it's a nice idea, but it's a myth because only 1,000th of the world's CO2 emissions are actually captured with the relevant technologies. And when you look a bit more in depth, or in my case, 5 minutes before you turn up here, to what carbon capture is, I mean, you can store it in oil fields, but if those oil fields burn, or if this CO2 explodes, it's going to cause more CO2 emissions. You're going to get people suffocating. So I don't see how that's feasible. The answer is to invest more in research and development, collaboration with global partners to find something that works. I mean, Bill Gates himself even said like he wants to do carbon capture, but what he said is the focus needs to be is to massively slow down the rate in which we generate CO2, or just not produce it at all. As for the methane, I do support that because I've driven trucks that run on biofuel. We just don't have enough infrastructure to support it yet, but I hope that builds. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jack. I'd just like to say, yeah, thank you. What he said. I agree with you. Hydrogen's a red herring, and I agree with your other comments as well. So having said that, and I also agree with your point about more research being needed, and somewhere here I've got a figure that we've committed to spending 30 billion over the next 5 years on research. And I've got a minute, so I'm just going to quote a little from the Mike Childs, Head of Policy at Friends of the Earth, who said of the Green Party manifesto, "It's so far the only political party that's grasped the reality that unless we properly invest in reducing carbon emissions from our homes, industries, farming and transport, it will be impossible to avoid the huge financial and human costs of the climate crisis in the future. Money spent on green growth is how we lower energy bills for good, create long-term jobs in clean industries and boost the economy. Honesty is essential in regaining trust in politics, so hats off to the Green Party for having the honesty to say that we can't fix our broken energy system, ailing public services and protect our planet without spending much more money. And we must ensure the burden does not fall on ordinary working families by fairly taxing the richest and making polluters pay." Thank you.
I'm going to slightly take issue with the premise of the question, which pains me, Alison, because we're good friends. However, I do think that if we're going to get to net zero, it's got to be an and I don't think we're yet ready to pick winners in terms of energy sources that we use, particularly for transportation. I agree with you about hydrogen for home heating. I think the National Infrastructure Commission have been very clear on this. They've been unequivocal about rejecting it because it's many times less efficient than using heat pumps. So it's likely not the answer. But potentially hydrogen for road haulage, for rail where it's impractical to electrify the rail network, it might be part of the answer, and I don't think we're ready to say one way or the other yet. I think there's a broader point about a just transition, though. As you will probably already be aware, Cheshire, West and Chester is the 4th highest polluting borough in the country, and a lot of that is to do with the Stanlow Oil Refinery. Now, I think we need to avoid an 80s style deindustrialisation that leaves communities decimated, and a hydrogen economy for Ellesmere Port is potentially one way of stopping that from happening. I agree that green hydrogen is where we want to be, but establishing blue hydrogen with carbon capture and storage first, getting the ecosystem established as a centre of hydrogen production, and then transitioning to green hydrogen later is, I think, the way to go. Because if we wait and reject it until it's perfect, it'll just get set up somewhere else. I'm afraid I haven't been able to answer your carbon capture and storage point, but I can assure you it was thoughtful and considered.
Yeah, so I agree that more research needs to be done on the hydrogen and the use of stoppage of fossil fuels. The carbon capture. Well, some of them that I've seen that we do around the world seem to be pretty good. The ones in the sea and like the certain sea plans that they've got in place, they seem to be really good that they're capturing carbon. Obviously not for what we're talking here, but some of them seem to work really well. and maybe not talking about the same thing, but the one that I've seen and the science that goes with it seems to be really good. I'm not saying you'll be able to turn it into transport, but it does take carbon from the environment, and it stores it into a natural source, which then gets rid of it all naturally. As I said, I think the science itself will, and research is where, and again, with what you said before, we have to think about people's finances, and sorry, I just got lost on there because the thing I've seen is like.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Me? Yeah. Sorry, miles away. Yes, it's. I certainly agree with what Andrew has gone and said in relation to hydrogen as being an option. Is I do think that if we are serious about tackling climate change, that we need to consider all options available. And certainly, I think the option of green hydrogen is a good one, because it solves the issue that a lot of renewables have, is that you can't always predict when the sun's going to shine and when the wind's going to blow. I mean, in this country, you can usually predict it's always going to rain. But personally, I go for small-scale hydroelectricity as something that I've been pushing for as well. As regards carbon capture, I do think that is a good idea worth exploring. It will help us buy more time for other measures to kick in. But as I've kind of said before, I think the biggest single solution to our energy production needs has always been and remains nuclear power. And we have got to accept that. We have got to accept it if we want to save the planet. Thank you.
Right, that completes that round. So the question 8 is from Gilly.
60 years ago, the parish of Darnall had squirrels, red squirrels in the trees and fish in the brook. What action could be taken by government to enable the return of biodiversity?
I'm so glad that at last we have a question about nature. Not least because I've got a statistic that I've been dying to share with everybody, but mostly and more seriously, the dramatic loss of our biodiversity is causing so much damage that it's only going to get worse unless we do something about it. This week, my brother, a keen bird watcher, drew my attention to a report on the BBC about insects in England and Wales. They've dropped by 59% since 2005. 59% by 2005. How do they know? They counted dead insects on car registration number plates, and they've more than halved. So it's no wonder that species are becoming extinct and there are far fewer insectivorous birds. The Green Party will fight for a new Right of Nature Act to ensure that nature cannot be exploited for financial gain. This will work in tandem with the Climate and Nature Act we've already talked about to enable us to meet our targets of setting aside 30% of the land and seas by 2030, in which nature will receive the highest priority and protection. The problem all candidates face is that we can turn up here and talk the talk, but when we get to Parliament, we have to toe the party line. So if it's not high up in the manifesto, will it happen? And frankly, if it isn't high up in the manifesto, is there a will to deliver it? With the Green Party, you can be sure the answer is yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I grew up in Formby on Merseyside, which is, I guess, the national home for red squirrels. I've got a soft spot for red squirrels, and I can tell you, if you want red squirrels to come back, all you have to do is pull out a camera and a bag of nuts, and they come running. At least they do at Formby Point. Look, tackling the nature emergency, including pollution of our rivers and seas, is absolutely essential, isn't it? And as I said earlier, we've got a plan for nature as part of our manifesto, which we will be delivering. It's about banning bee-killing pesticides. It's about growing our nature-rich habitats, more wetlands, more peat bogs, and allowing wildlife to thrive. And on the Environment Act, which is already in place but hasn't been properly implemented yet. We need to conserve a minimum of 30% of land and sea by 2030, and it's important that we do that. It's important that we get that implemented.
I have to say the red squirrel was one of the saddest things my dad ever seen, that the fact that they basically weren't around anymore around Chester and around Winsford Northwich and that, and they were overtaken by the grey squirrel. But he also said that he's not here anymore, but also that years ago that there was a breeding program into place to remix squirrels. And if you look careful, if you look now, you can see that the mix, the grey and red. So I assume that that's what they're trying to do, to bring the red squirrels back forward to mix them. I think it's sad that I'm particularly a lover of nature, and it saddens me that we're in a state where we don't appreciate the natural world around us. There's so much more that we have, and we need to get back to that. I'm lucky that I was educated by my dad, who was a complete lover of nature, and we need to make sure that this is, this is where I start, because I bring my own personal love of nature into it, and I will stand and make sure that we get back to nature. We need to make sure that, sorry, it's because I get so passionate about it. We need to stop the pesticides. We need to go back to natural things. We need to encourage more growing of our own vegetables. We need nature.
Thank you. I mean, red squirrels, their disappearance, I'm afraid, is more to do with grey squirrels than climate change. And the only way to get the red squirrels back is to get rid of the grey squirrels. But that's an entirely different discussion. As regards biodiversity, I mean, this is being attempted through our Landmark Environment Act, which Andrew mentioned, and it includes ambitious targets to halt nature decline by 2030 and the imposition of what's known as biodiversity net gain, which is a world-leading scheme to deliver greener new development. And the concept of that is where you build houses, the land that you built them on, you have to go and improve other land so that there is a net gain in the biodiversity. So I think there are bits like that where, again, we're going to have to be more innovative if we want to go and get improved biodiversity, but still be able to function as a proper society. Because as I say, if we do not get the right balance, we will end up destroying our economy, and it will not do us any good if the rest of the world doesn't act as well. Thank you.
Well, I must admit, I'm surprised that there's actually some environmental policy that the Lib Dems and the Conservatives actually agree on. But what you said, Charles, about having a significant net gain policy for developers is actually something that's in the Lib Dem manifesto too. We have to force the housing developers to act via regulation. We have to use the law to our advantage. One thing that will help towards that, I think, is the mechanisms in which councils can buy land. Now, at the moment, councils have to buy land on their predicted value rather than their actual land value. So if we can actually bring some of that power back towards councils, if developers aren't willing to act, that's just one example of a tool that the councils can use to get that balance right. Now, in our fair deal, we've said that we want to double the abundance of species by 2050 by doubling the size of our most important wildlife habitats. And we also want to help farmers build natural flood protections, so things like restoring woodland, peatland to protect waterways. These are just some of the policies that we've got. But if you look at the bigger picture, our emissions and the temperature of the planet keeps getting higher. At some point, evolution is going to play its part. As the planet gets hotter, certain species are going to die out. So we've got all these grand ideas, but unless we address the big fundamental problem of the increasing temperature of the planet, it might all come to nothing.
Okay, so the next question, number 9, is from James.
So you may be aware that there's currently a waste incinerator being built in the mid-Cheshire constituency in Rugby. So this is the company are calling this energy from waste, but we all know it's a waste incinerator. It will destroy viable resources. It will emit vast amounts of greenhouse gases. It'll pollute the air locally with increased lorry movements and also the emissions out of chimney stack. And that will affect the health of local people. So will your government ban any expansion of these types of plants? And will you commit to encouraging the development of alternatives as well as the promotion of the reduction in waste? And I'd just like to add that in the last week there was a landmark Supreme Court judgment that rejected the planning permission of a fossil project, and that sets a precedent that all the emissions of these types of projects should be taken into account when assessing the environmental impact. And I believe that opens the door to the challenge of this site that's being built currently. So will you commit to working with local people such as myself to come up with a challenge to that planning commission?
Look, I think it's really important that we deal with our waste domestically. I think exporting waste to other countries to be processed or incinerated, as has happened previously, is not a moral choice. I was opposed to the construction of the incinerator in Northwich, not least because it was old technology. We've got anaerobic digestion already up and running in Northwich. We've got at the Orsted plant where waste goes in, it goes into the anaerobic digester, they get methane off the top and they get a high quality recyclable material out of the other end, which can then be sent off and reused or reprocessed. How we get waste to these incinerators, at the moment is really unsatisfactory. You'll know if you're aware of the Lostock plant that it's right next to a railhead that isn't being used. And having discussed it with LSEP, the reason it appears to be is it's all to do with how the contracts with the councils that are providing with the waste are set up. So it seems to me that there's a real gap here that needs more intervention and more planning around it, because it's down to the council to say, we would like to take the waste by rail, so build a railhead here. Well, if you're doing that on a council by council basis, that's never going to work. So I think it needs much more strategic planning. Labour is committed to reducing waste by moving towards a more circular economy. So I'm going to answer your specific question about will our government ban any expansion of incinerators? And the honest answer is I don't know, because we've not said whether we will or not in the manifesto. But I can say that I was opposed to the Northwich incinerator, and I'll be opposed to any further expansion of it.
Well, yes, I would be. I'm opposed to this as well. And we have Cheshire West and Chester councillors who would have had to vote on this, and they're a mixture of Labour and Conservative. So it's something that they should have already tried to not have happen. And if so, they should have also tried to make sure that there's issues in place or raise concerns for our area, for Mid-Cheshire, so that people are checked out. And it's something that even before the general election, before this is something that would have been at least years in the planning of this. And it's something that, again, us in the north seem to always get left behind, or doesn't matter, things are dumped on us. And the Cheshire West and Chester councillors should have put up a fight to fight against this, I think.
Thank you. I mean, as mentioned in relation to the issue in incinerators, our manifesto does actually give a clear commitment, and it states, we will prevent new waste incinerators being built, including those with recent permit approvals, revoking those where substantial construction has not taken place. This recognises the impact on local communities, and that increased recycle rates will reduce the need for incineration capacity in the longer term. So that is a clear commitment within there. I do think, again, about the point in relation to recycling rate, that's important. Cheshire West has stagnated. We're still on about 60%, which was the level of the recycling rate when my party left office 9 years ago. So there hasn't really been any improvement on it. Now, I was on planning committee for a number of years, and whilst I hear the frustration, what you have to understand about planning committee is that it has to make decisions on planning reasons. That's what it has to do. And I was about 10 years ago on an incinerator one where we voted it down, but we were told by the chief legal officer that our reasons weren't good enough, and that had they been appealed, not only would it have been overturned, but we would have had costs added on as well. And we then re-voted and had to vote in favour of it because we had to look at this for the legal reasons. Now, one of the things we did there on a personal, I would argue for more air monitoring stations around incinerators, both upwind and downwind, and I got that put down as a condition on that incinerator 10 years ago, and I would be arguing for the same here. So we then have the evidence.
Well, incinerators are actually quite a sore subject for me because I grew up in Runcorn, and I'm pretty sure quite a few of you are familiar with the waste incinerator in Western Point. Obviously, a lot of the population rejected it, but the Labour-run administration there have always sort of favoured witness and treated Runcorn like a bit of an afterthought, and this was just another example of it. And the borough of Halton has one of the highest cancer rates in all of the UK, and if you're going to be pumping all of this into the atmosphere, that's going to make it worse. But this is actually an example of, believe it or not, a Brexit benefit, obviously in inverted commas, because I saw an article this week about how we were able to import these 2 cranes because of the free trade agreement that we have with Australia and New Zealand. Apparently we're allowed to do this now because of the free trade agreement. So the payoff is, okay, we can build this incinerator quicker, but we shaft our farmers in the process. As part of that very same free trade agreement, we're able to import hormone-filled, intensively farmed beef and cattle, thanks to the ineptness of Boris Johnson. So not only are we going to destroy our environment, we're also going to kill our farming industry as a result. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm going to keep this brief. Yes, we'd follow the science in dealing with waste and more positively look to reduce waste overall by encouraging reuse, repair, recycling and designing out waste. I can commit on behalf of Mark that if elected, he would certainly be looking for more environmentally friendly solutions than it sounds as though your incinerator problem is. Like you, I'm also delighted by the Supreme Court's decision this week, and I'm going to come on and talk about it later.
Okay, thank you. Question 10 is from Andy.
Substitute question for that.
All right.
Climate change is making flooding in Northwich increasingly worse, mainly because of rain pouring into the rivers from all the roofs and concrete of new places like Barron's Quay. If you are elected, will you establish sustainable urban drainage systems in our towns to stop the misery of repeated flooding of people's houses, businesses and schools?
Yeah, so this is really thinking of me. So 30 years ago, I worked in the Red Lion and it never used to flood. And the Guildhall used to flood, which has been totally, because obviously the Guildhall is at the top hill. And that's changed over the last couple of years to the fact that the Guildhall now doesn't flood, but the Red Lion is actually always flooded. So yes, something is obviously going on with all the building that is happening. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is because I've got something that that puzzled me, and because I've got something that I can reference to. I want to show you that it is something that I think I've thought about for the last few years, and we've got more houses that are going up, and yes, this definitely should be more sustainable. We also need to do more geotesting of the lands that are around us, because we've had more sinkholes and things like that. And we also need to make sure that the flooding does stop. So there's definitely something going on in the areas that needs more investigation. And also that it's because it's right. I know people lose houses of flooding, and it's unfortunate.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, SUDs are part of the solution, but so is effective drainage management. And our councils are letting us down by not keeping it as up to date as they should be. The 2019 Northwich floods were worsened by the failure to keep up maintenance of the no return valves along the River Weaver. Also, part of the solution for managed drainage along the River Weaver is ensuring the sluices are kept open, and so that river levels can be opened at times of increased flood risk. However, for this to work properly, it also needs to be carried through to where the River Weaver empties into the Manchester Ship Canal and then into the River Mersey. Now, I urged Cheshire West Cabinet to consider this on 3 separate occasions when they were looking into the 2019 and 2021 flood reports. However, they declined on each one of those, and I do not understand why, because it's a sensible thing to do to try and help that. But again, I think if the problems are being made worse by the councils not acting properly. There was one report today by a councillor in Hertford where he's reporting block drainage. It was last inspected in 2023, and it's not due to be inspected again until 2025. And that we've got to get on top of these sort of things, because it's causing more problems. And that's what we need to be able to do to help minimise the flooding issues that we have. Thank you.
Well, I'll be totally frank and honest on this one, because I've not had experience of local government like Charles, Andrew, Stella. I'm probably not going to be as well versed when it comes to this question. I can only speak anecdotally as someone who lives around the corner from Northwich Town Centre. I feel that not many town councils have to deal with such a scale of flooding like we saw in 2019. And just anecdotally, from what I can see, Northwich Town Council have done a hell of a job in containing it going forward. I think that definitely is something that deserves credit. In terms of what the Lib Dems want to do as part of our fair deal, we want to implement Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act so that we have sustainable drainage in new developments. In terms of retrofitting and what we do in places that are currently affected, I'll be totally frank, there was nothing in the manifesto on that, so I can't really give a great answer on that, I'll be totally frank, but that is essentially the Liberal Democrat stance on new developments.
I don't know where to start with this one. Certainly, yes, where appropriate, we will establish SUDs. We need to look at planning for climate resilience in the broadest possible way. I was a bit distracted by Charles knocking the local councils, when the reason why councils can't afford to do these things is because of the Conservative austerity programme. Nonetheless, climate change also brings with it the risk of more and more and more flooding. So we need to be doing more and more about it instead of doing less and less about it. How is it today that house builders can't be forced to meet passive house standards, although in Scotland they will be doing from the beginning of next year? But there's a Red Road development near me that doesn't even have solar panels on all its large commuter belt houses. And the development I saw as I was coming in today, no solar panels, no air source heat pumps. What are we doing allowing developments like that at a time like now? In Poynton, over my side of town, the relief road was built with no consideration for flooding. So now the local pond is threatened with the demolition of its beauty to create a flood barrier, and also at a cost of millions of pounds. We need to have more joined up planning for climate resilience in the broadest of ways. I'm sorry, I've veered off the specifics of flood defences, but my point is that everything in the climate and nature is intertwined.
Thank you. Well, it was my council ward that flooded in 2019 and then again in 2021. And I will never forget standing on next to the Bombay Quay and watching my residents being brought out of the Weaver Court residential home by boat. That is something that stays with you. you never forget it. I think it's really important to understand the reasons why Northwich Town Centre floods. And there's two of them really. It's when it rains on the River Weaver catchment and the Petthorton Hills, and when it rains on Buxton, and when it rains on Northwich at the same time, then you get a trifecta where the river level gets too high, so the flat valves can't open, and you have too much water in the combined sewerage system. And because of decades of underinvestment in the combined sewerage system, all of the water from a semicircle of around Cumberbatch down to Moulton ends up into two pressurised sewers at Dock Road Pumping Station in Lethbridge. So if you imagine the river level's too high and you've got too much water in the system, it's going to come out somewhere, and it comes out in Waitrose car park, and that's what happened. Now, the short term is that the short term answer to the 2021 flood was that the Canal and River Trust needed to fix the Dutton sluice gates. None of them were working, so the river couldn't be emptied quick enough. They have now fixed that at a cost of about £1.5 million. So that's one part of it. Increasing pumping capacity is what Cheshire Council have done in the short term, which gets us over this initial barrier, but it's not a long-term solution. Putting sewage into rivers is not a long-term solution. What we've got is an integrated catchment model that's being produced. I'm sorry, do you mind if I finish this sentence, because I'm mid-flow. We've got an integrated catchment model being produced jointly with United Utilities, the Environment Agency and Cheshire Council to look at what the solutions are. They may involve SUDs, we'll see, but we need more investment in the combined sewerage system to solve the problem long term.
Thank you. We're just going slightly out of order with the questions. How are we doing for time, Chair?
Yep, we're doing okay. So I think we can.
Yeah.
I don't think we've got question 11, so it's 12 and 13.
Yeah. So Cynthia will ask the next question. Number 12.
The main driver of the cost of living crisis is fuel costs. Electricity prices are kept artificially high by being tied to the price of gas rather than the cost of production. Will any of your parties decouple the cost of electricity from the price of gas, reducing people's energy bills and making it far more cost effective to increase cheap renewable energy?
Yeah, I mean, whilst fuel costs clearly are a cost of living issue, the spike in production costs in recent years was a combination of an increase in demand as the world came out of the sort of global pandemic lockdown, and then the Ukraine conflict, which had an impact in relation to both fuel prices and food prices. Now, the cost of living crisis was being talked about long before then, and it is a wider issue than simply fuel costs or energy costs. For example, housing costs are too high in this country because of decades of government, Labour, Conservative coalition simply have not built enough houses. As regards in renewable energy, that's great, but if we're serious, again, we need to build more nuclear. That is the only option. Thank you.
I mean, looking at it from my personal experience, I can remember when we were really deep in the cost of living crisis and actually trying to read my utility bill. They don't make it easy. I can remember trying to work out how gas was so expensive and how electricity was so expensive. And I sort of worked out that with electricity, they would triple your kilowatt per hour usage, but keep the standing charge the same. Whereas with gas, they'd keep the basically units per hour down, but they triple the standing charge. So that's kind of subtly how our energy companies got away with it. Now, as a Liberal Democrat, I believe in institutions and the power of them, especially their independence. And this is where Ofgem need to get a grip and hold them to account to stop these practices, because not everybody is going to look at the weeds in terms of, okay, this is the actual breakdown of my bill. How can I make things cheaper for myself when the system's rigged against you? That's just not right. I think as well, gas storage has been a problem as well. Since we actually left the European Union, our actual gas storage has decreased significantly and it's left us more exposed. So if we don't have the abundance of resources that we can share with our European friends and neighbours, then that's obviously going to drive costs up domestically. The solution ultimately is just to produce more green energy. Now, Ed Davey, he was the climate minister under the coalition government, and he was actually quite the champion for wind farms. And when we look at how we're going to produce more energy in this country, when it comes to, say, things like wind turbines, I think in some cases we need to prioritise the need for that energy over the aesthetics of where those are going to be.
Well, we can argue all night about whether the main driver of the cost of living crisis is fuel costs, or is it inequality, or is it the heartless way the last government has failed to support and indeed sought to punish and other the vulnerable in our society. When the Trussell Trust is saying they had to issue only 50,000 packs in 2010, but by 2023 that had risen to 3 million food parcels for the Trussell Trust. That's not due to fuel costs, that's due to deliberate policies by successive governments. Well, the Green Party will address the fuel costs, accelerating clean energy investment and delivery, stopping expenditure on nuclear power. It's expensive and it's slower to develop than renewables, and it distracts from renewables. We will commit 29 billion over 5 years to insulate homes to EPC standard B or above, retrofitting both private and social housing. And we will finance this through a carbon tax, which will indeed make it far more cost effective to increase cheap renewable energy. Thank you.
You. Well, yeah, I speak to residents all the time. I think over the last year, me and my team have spoken to nearly 14,000 conversations around this constituency, and cost of living comes up time and again. The cost of living crisis has touched everyone in recent years, whether it's housing costs, food costs, or energy. It comes up time and again. Now, this isn't a new crisis. Wages have been stagnant for more than a decade, and as my Green Party colleague here said, we have had rising food bank use. I've actually got 60,000 in 2010, up to 3 million, but it's neither here nor there. It's still an awful increase and indictment of the last 15 years. Now, on the specific question of decoupling the price of gas from the electricity price, this is something that Labour has been calling for a long time. It was part of the debate under the Energy Prices Act in 2022, I think. As it was making its way through Parliament. And last year, Ed Miliband called for a timetable for this to happen. Our focus going into government, if we have the privilege of forming the next government, will be on getting to clean power by 2030, by doubling onshore wind, tripling solar and quadrupling offshore wind. And we want to do that through by switching on Great British Energy, which will invest in renewables, it'll invest in new nuclear. It will give us achieve greater energy independence. Part of it as well is our warm homes plan, which is going to insulate 5 million homes over the next Parliament. These are two things that are going to bring down energy bills and help with the cost of living.
As I said before, I think I did jump ahead on one of my questions about the prices of gas and electricity. They are still estimated by some gas and electricity companies, unless you give your reading, which some people can't do. And I have been in touch with Ofgem myself, and also the Ombudsman, to ask why still today in 2024 people are being charged for estimated bills. Also, with the renewables, we can build more wind turbines. We can also put more solar panels in. But we also need to build more storage places for it to be stored, because we're producing more energy, but there's nowhere to put it. And the gas and electric companies that are doing this also then charge and resell it somewhere else. We need more storage, as well as building more wind turbine and solar panels. This is something that needs to be looked at by all the major parties. I might be an independent, but things like this are really passionate, really strong for me, and I may be just one voice, and all these other parties have got their parties behind them, but it's something that needs to be asked, and it's something that needs to be really spoken loud and strong. It should be people before profit, and we need to make sure that our environment and the electric and the gas needs to be stored properly so we can be all the electricity gas used properly. Thank you.
Okay, you might all be glad to know this is the last question.
Yeah.
So we're getting towards the end for those that are desperate for the toilet or the pub or whatever people are desperate for. The pub maybe, yes. Okay, so Kathy?
Yeah, so we had initially hardly any questions to choose from, then a flood of questions, and several people sent in several questions, and we've tried to combine some of them. And the last question is from Linda.
Do you support a permanent ban of the cull and supplementary badger cull and give them greater protection from harm, including loss of habitat and foraging land?
Well, I was speaking to one of my colleagues about the issue with badgers, specifically in Winsford, and one of the problems that was highlighted to me was the integrity of sign-offs in terms of saying, okay, this is definitely viable, badgers can live here, etc., etc. But the trouble is the way that power is structured in these sorts of things, where a protest group or some sort of activist group tries to highlight these issues, the power still sort of sways more towards the developers. So they'll go, yeah, that's fine, no problem. And the reality is the badgers suffer. In terms of badger culls, I mean, morally, I definitely don't support badger culling. As part of our fair deal, we want to greatly increase our mass vaccination program so that we can prevent the spread of tuberculosis in a more humane way. But if there are instances where we cannot actually get a grip of a particular spread and the spread's too great, then we might have to cull. And I know ethically that isn't right, it's not fair, but we also have to balance the interests of farmers and our food security. So if we can't produce the fresh food that we need, we might have to strike a rather unethical balance. But ultimately, in the long term, I definitely want to see the doubling of the sustainable land so that badgers can thrive. And also, in the long term, we want a solid vaccination program as well.
So yes, I can give you a clear and unequivocal answer. Yes, Green MPs will campaign against badger culling. The cull has no evidence basis and has failed to effectively reduce bovine TB. We will fund research into a sensitive test to enable cattle vaccination as part of a meaningful strategy to control the spread of the disease. And we'll invest in better farm biosecurity and badger vaccination. Where necessary for ecological reasons or for animals described as pests, humane culling will be licensed by Natural England and carried out by trained professionals. More broadly, we pride ourselves on being a nation of animal lovers, yet animal cruelty is still all around us, and the natural habitats of wild animals are under threat. It's time for better choices and to better protect animals. Elected Greens will push for the creation of a commission on animal protection, a ban on all blood sports, including trail hunting, and strengthening and extending the Hunting Act, and a legal requirement for all British territorial and overseas waters to offer the highest protection to marine life. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, after the government began to allow badger culling in Cheshire in 2017, Labour-led Cheshire West and Chester Council developed a 5-year vaccination scheme for 2 rural areas around Northwich, and that started in September 2019. Now, the government had announced in 2020 that they'd be phasing out badger culling by 2025, but as Environment Secretary, Therese Coffey has reneged on that and committed to continuing with the cull for as long as she considered it the best way to control bovine TB. By contrast, Daniel Zeichner, our Shadow Farming Minister, has said that Labour will end the badger cull and tackle bovine TB by other means. My view on this is that culling as a means of controlling bovine TB is not supported by evidence. In Wales, the Welsh government has shown that a focus on vaccination and enhanced biosecurity measures for cattle has reduced bovine TB without the need for a general cull. So that's what we'll be doing.
We definitely would do the ban on the culling. We've culled so many other animals and wild animals in the past to the damage that it's done to the environment from the beaver, and other things, and it's no scientific evidence that it actually does anything apart from damage to the environment, and the loss of habitats with all the building of houses. At the start, they used to have beavers that come. I got my date mixed up with the Red Lion and the Starport. That was 30 years ago. They used to come. There used to be quite a few families there, and with that new housing building there, they don't come anymore. It's sad to know that wildlife has been taken away, and what right do we have as human beings to destroy the natural world?
I mean, yes, I mean, I would prefer a vaccination program if it could work, but as things stand, I would still support the option in terms of the cull in relation to badgers and bovine TB, because of the impact on farming sector and especially the dairy industry in an area like Cheshire. So I believe it is an option that needs to remain on the table. I would prefer it not to, but sometimes you have to make difficult decisions, and that is one of them. We should be proud of our dairy industry in the UK. It is exceptionally green in comparison to dairy around the world. It produces only 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions in comparison to the global average. There are 278 million dairy cattle around the world. If they were as green as our dairy sector, we'd only need 76 million. So we have a very good dairy farming sector here, and we need to support them. And sometimes that means we have to make some very difficult decisions. So that's it.
Okay, well, that was it. Some very interesting topical questions, lots of diverse answers, lots of debate. So thank you for everybody for your questions. They're very much appreciated. So just as a final wrap up, every candidate is going to give a 1-minute summary of the evening, and I think for this we'll start that will move the other way along the table.
I apologise for being so nervous and maybe not answering the questions as well as I could have done. The environment is really important to me, as is nature. I've been a vegetarian since I was 13, and I love the natural world around us. And for me, mid-Cheshire in the north seems to always be let down. And that's one of the reasons why I've stood independently, and I can make, for me, it's the voice that just doesn't get heard. As being separate from a party, I can stand up for the residents of mid-Cheshire, because that's what matters to me, is that our towns seem to just do not get heard. If you're in a political party, you have to follow their script. You have to follow their manifesto. I know I was really nervous tonight, and I may have stuttered and answered maybe the questions that, I mean, sometimes not made sense, but I do speak from the heart, and I do really care about our towns, and I care about nature, and I do really, really care about the environment as well.
Well, look, you've heard from us all tonight. I think there's been a good deal of consensus actually on many of the issues we've discussed tonight. And you've all got an important decision to make. Many people at this election have still to made their mind up. And whether you support me or not, if I'm lucky enough to be elected, I'll never take that for granted. And I'll work each and every day to demonstrate that people were right to place their trust in Labour and in me. Thank you.
After all that, I hope I've no need to convince you that the Green Party are, as George Monbiot said in The Guardian, our best hope. However, you may still need convincing that on July the 4th, you should vote for Mark Green, the aptly named Green Party candidate for Mid-Cheshire. Frankly, we need the money your vote will bring. Every vote helps to fund our parliamentary team through a process known as short money. And it brings in about £40 a year for every 200 of your votes. And that's how Caroline Lucas staffed her parliamentary office after the last election. So your vote is worth money to us. And that's a good reason for voting Green, because I quite often hear people go, oh, I'd vote Green if only the Greens could win. But every vote helps us and therefore helps us to influence the next parliament. There'll be a lot of pressure on you to vote tactically, but tactical voting only works if you get what you want. If you want a fairer, more equal society committed to addressing the climate change, then vote Green. If Labour becomes the next government, as we expect, we'll need Green MPs to inspire them to embrace greener policies. Already they've sidelined the Green New Deal and cut the £28 billion of green investment. So I hope you will vote Green on July the 4th, vote for the party and for your candidate, Mark Green, for real hope of real change. Thank you.
Well, I must admit, isolating it to one policy area has been really intense, and I feel like I've come away from this feeling like I've really got a lot more to do personally about green issues. So I really appreciate the opportunity to, have a look at that today. But on a bigger scale, unless we address poverty by removing the 2-child cap, providing free social care, reducing VAT on electric cars, things won't change. Unless we prosecute our water companies to stop sewage spills, things won't change. Unless we transform our democracy to have more green-minded politicians through proportional representation, things won't change. Unless we can convince right-wing politicians that higher net migration will be driven by climate change, things won't change. Unless we stop treating the annual COP meeting like a cop-out and actually enforce the treaties we sign up to meaningfully, things won't change. Our party leader is an environmentalist at heart. We've got a strong green ethos in the party, and our Fair Deal has proven very popular amongst voters. So all I can ask is that you'll give me a chance and you'll back Jack on polling day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for coming this evening. I mean, the good news is whoever wins this election, we're already leading the world on action on climate change. The first G20 country to have halved our carbon emissions, but we're not going to solve climate change on our own. And we have to get the right balance, because destroying our economy and outsourcing pollution overseas will not solve the problem. We must get the balance right. Mid-Cheshire needs an MP who will be a strong voice, not only in Westminster, but also with Cheshire West and Cheshire East councils, as our 3 great salt towns too often seem to be overlooked. So please vote for me, Charles Fifield. Thank you.
Well, what an evening. So we have a new constituency, Mid-Cheshire, and we've got a very engaged audience tonight. So thank you for everybody for turning out on the Sunday night. Very much appreciated. So first of all, could I start by just giving a round of applause to the candidates? I think they're both well done excellently tonight and answered the questions that were posed and been as honest and frank as they could be. So we appreciate that. Just a word for Kathy as well from Winsford Sustainability Partners, who's had a big hand in organising this. So it's good that we can put on these events in Winsford. So round of applause for Kathy as well. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
And thank you, Mark.